God turn a tragedy into a comedy? The Bible contains some stories that are so startling and horrific and disturbing, we might wish they weren't there. And this is one of them. But here's the thing. This shows that the Bible can handle our reality. Now there's plenty of lovely, charming stories in the Bible, like the Book of Ruth. Benjamin Franklin loved the Book of Ruth. Really quickly, can anyone just summarize what happens in the Book of Ruth? Anyone remember what happens there? Yeah, go ahead, Veronica.
Like, I know the story?
Yeah, just like really just overview.
She and her mother-in-law, they go to this place, and she's like, I'm gonna go to the mother-in-law's like, I'm gonna go here, back to my house, but it's a really long journey. You girls stay here and like, be happy here because you guys are young and stuff. And Ruth's like, no, I love you, I'm gonna stay with you.
Yeah, that's kind of like 25% of the way into the story. It's a little bit of context, yeah. Like, so Ruth is like a Moabite, and she marries a Hebrew, and her husband dies, and her mother-in-law is like, you know, you guys live your life, and she's like, no, I love you. So she goes back, this Moabite woman named Ruth goes back to Israel and lives as a Hebrew and ends up falling in love with Boaz, and there's this lovely romance between them. And it's a really charming, beautiful, like little love story that's in the Bible. Very quaint, right? But the Bible is not just a collection of quaint stories like the Book of Ruth, which sound nice, but don't always sound like the gritty reality that we read about in the news, or in some cases see in our lives. My mother is she works with female prison inmates who we're trying to reintegrate into society. And they've got stories, right? Stories about violence and family abuse and substance abuse that leave you shaken just hearing them. And if all we have are the kind of lovely, sweet, feel-good parts of Scripture, then we don't actually have a gospel that can speak God's message into dark situations like that. If we believe that Christ has come into this world to save us, we need a gospel that can handle the darkest and grittiest things that we can throw at it. And that's what we have here. It's a tough world, but the Bible is just as tough. And we got a really tough story here, although it's one that oddly enough fits into Advent really well. But to understand this very disturbing story, we have to understand that this is the conclusion of a tragedy. Now, people use these terms really loosely, but properly speaking, in traditional literary terms, what's the difference between a tragedy and a comedy? Hands up if you know. Which a bunch of you do. Yeah, go ahead, Dustin.
A tragedy is when something good turns into something bad, and a comedy is when something bad turns into something good.
Oh, that's not bad. Yeah, that's one way to summarize it for sure. A comedy has a happy ending, tragedy has a sad ending, but tragedy, it's specifically, this is what I think you're saying about a good thing. It's about a heroic protagonist, but who comes to a sad ending because of a fatal flaw. And the Greek word for this fatal flaw, it's hamartia. It's the same word used in the New Testament for sin, right? It means missing the mark, right? So William Shakespeare, obviously, he's the master of Christian tragedy. Right? Think of Macbeth, which we're discussing recently in English 20, right? So he hears this prophecy that he will be king, and he starts as this kind of noble, loyal warrior, and he could trust in God. If you're going to be king one day, right? God can work that out. But there's this moment where, prompted by Lady Macbeth, of course, he decides, no, I'm going to take this for myself. I'm going to speed God's plan along a little bit, right? So he goes ahead and kills the king so that he can become the new king. And there's many opportunities he has to turn back. Like he stops and has this soliloquy about this dagger he sees floating, and he's really conflicted about it. But ultimately, he goes ahead. Takes this step that sets him on this path that leads to complete destruction for him. Right? In tragedy, the hero ends up suffering the consequences of their sins. And Lot's story is also a thoroughly Christian tragedy. Okay? So let's just review the story of Lot, right? Because it started last year, not all of you were here last year. Right? Lot starts off as an orphan. Okay? His father, Haran, has died. Presumably, he got an inheritance from his dad. So he's already rich. Lot is apparently adopted by Abram, who's childless, as we know at this point. Right? Now, we know that Abram educates his household really well. Abram is himself a wise man, learned in astronomy, right? He counts the stars. Probably good at math and science as well, and a worshiper of the true God. He teaches all this to Lot, presumably. Right? So when God calls Abram to a promised land, And Abram leaves behind an idol-worshipping family. Lot comes with him. So Lot is on the path to the promised land with Abram. In a sense, the path to heaven. All right? Even though this means they have to live in tents because they're waiting for their true home that God will give them, Lot comes along and accepts this lifestyle. It must not be as comfortable to live in a tent as it is to live in a house, but it's worth it to follow God. So Lot seems to have some faith. So Lot starts off with everything going for him. He's young, he's rich, he's well educated, he knows about the true God, he's on his way to the promised land. St. Peter calls Lot righteous in the New Testament. Lot is literally on the right track. He's like a Chesterton Academy student. All right? And he's very closely associated with Abram, right? It starts off by saying in Genesis 12, Abram went and Lot went with him. Abram took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all their possessions. Like, the name Lot is just really close to Abram. So you get the sense they're very tight. Now, in Genesis 12, they experience a famine, and they go into Egypt. Right? Now, Egypt is, of course, the richest, most powerful country in the world, but it's also a very evil country. But Pharaoh gives Abram a whole bunch of goods and pleasurable things, right, because he wants to take Sarah as his own wife. And you get the sense that maybe Lot got kind of comfortable there. Right? Now, Pharaoh and Abram have their falling out when it turns out that Sarah is actually Abram's wife, so he kicks them out. But I think that Lot came to kind of miss Egypt. He came to kind of miss how comfortable it was there. Sure, it's an evil place, but we were really rich there. We were really comfortable there. Right? Like the Hebrews in the wilderness, he kind of remembers Egypt fondly. And then we get to Genesis 13. Right? And I think after Egypt, there's already kind of a separation between Lot and Abram. Because the way it's described in Genesis 13, it says, Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with them. Right? Lot's name is kind of further away from Abram's name. Right? Now, because of all the goods that Pharaoh gave him, now Abram is super wealthy. So Lot's super wealthy, Abram is super wealthy. They have too many goods, right? And what we read is that their servants are getting in fights with each other. There's not enough room for all their their herds, right, and all their animals. The land could not support them, for they stayed together, and quarreling arose between their servants. So Abram solves this by saying to Lot, hey, we shouldn't fight, we're family, let's split up so we don't have this conflict anymore, and wherever you want to go, you go. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. He gives the initiative to Lot. Right? Now, here's what I think Lot should have done. Lot knows that God has called Abram to this promised land. I think he should have stayed with Abram. And if that meant he had to say, look, you know what? This means I have to give away all my possessions so that we don't have too many people around, we're not having this conflict. I will impoverish myself so that I can stay with you, Abram, and go with you to Canaan one day. I'll do it. Right? Kind of like the rich young man, right? Jesus tells him, sell everything you have, right? And then you'll have the kingdom of heaven. Is that what Lot did? No, he does not part with his goods. Instead, he does decide to leave Abram and go live somewhere else. Where does he go to live? Yeah. Well, initially, so he looks over at Sodom, and it says that he saw that Sodom was well watered. It was like the garden of the Lord, and like the land of Egypt. So at this point, Sodom literally looks like paradise. It looks like the Garden of Eden. It looks like Egypt. And Lot really misses it. So if he moves here, maybe he can feel like he's in Egypt again. But the problem is, the Bible also says, the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So yeah, the land is beautiful, but the people are really evil. Despite that, Lot decides to go live by Sodom. Right? I think Lot thought, well, I'm not going to let the people corrupt me. Because he doesn't move into Sodom at first. What it says is that he went and he pitched his tent, so he's still living in a tent, near Sodom. So, I'm not going to actually go into the city, it's dangerous there, but I'm going to live in this land because the land is really nice. I'll still keep my integrity. I'm not going to let Sodom corrupt me. Right? I'll enjoy the benefits of the land, and I'll enrich myself from Sodom, but I'm not going to be corrupted by Sodom. And I think that's the hamartia. That's the fatal flaw. That's the moment he makes the choice that sets him down the wrong path. Thinking, I'll live near Sodom, I'll benefit from Sodom, but I won't let Sodom corrupt me. Because what happens to him next? Well, Sodom gets involved in a political revolution that fails, and it gets conquered by these 4 kingdoms, and then Lot gets kidnapped and arrested and becomes a prisoner to these 4 countries, right? Because he was living in Sodom, right? Now notice that. The Bible says it's because he was living in Sodom, which tells you he's moved into the city. Sometime between Genesis 13 and Genesis 14, he wasn't just pitching his tent near Sodom, he moved into Sodom. Probably more convenient. You don't have to travel as far to get your groceries, all right? Probably a house there, a little more convenient than a tent. But again, he's not going to let it corrupt him, right? He's going to keep his integrity, he's going to keep worshiping the true God, right? Well, he gets kidnapped, because all of Sodom gets kidnapped. I think this was God giving him a huge warning. This is not a safe place to be. If you're in Sodom, it won't turn out well for you. I'm giving you an out now. Because then Abram goes and rescues him, right? Abram and his 318 servants go, and they rescue Lot, and they deliver Sodom. And then, what's interesting, is the king of Sodom says, thank you, Abram, for delivering us from slavery. Here, accept anything you want from me. I'll give you anything you want as gratitude. And Abram says, no, king of Sodom, I will not accept so much as a shoestring from you. Because it's blood money. Right? Sodom's an evil place. He doesn't want to be contaminated by anything from there. It's a big clue to Lot. Right? It's a big clue to Lot. No, don't get rich off Sodom. Don't think you can play with this and not be corrupted by it. It's a huge moment of grace for Lot. Think about when, for example, addicts. When addicts finally decide to turn their lives around by God's grace, what does it usually take for an addict to finally break out of their cycle of addiction?
To hit rock
Reaching
bottom.
their lowest.
Sorry?
Go ahead, Veronica.
Yeah, go ahead.
Was it reaching their lowest?
Yeah, usually, yeah, some they witness something really bad for themselves or to somebody else. They see somebody else OD and die, right? Or something really bad happens to them. They wake up one morning and they're disgusted by what's happened to them, right? And that's that kind of moment of grace. Like, okay, I can either get out now before I spiral to the point where there's no salvation for me anymore, or that's it, that's where I'm headed. And I think that's the case for Lot, right? Lot moves into Sodom, and God gives him this moment of, no, you gotta get out. I'm gonna let you be abducted, and Abram's gonna deliver you, and Abram's gonna tell the king of Sodom, no, I'm not gonna take anything from you, not even a shoestring. Big clue to Lot, get out now. Lot does not take the hint. He stays in Sodom. Apparently he gets married there, because we never hear about Lot's wife prior to Sodom, so he presumably marries a local woman. And he has children there, has daughters. And as Dr. McCarney mentioned, he becomes a very prominent figure in the city, right? He's sitting at the gates. If you read the book of Ruth, you'll see that when you're solemnizing like legal covenants and whatever, you go to the elders at the gates. Like they're sitting at the gates, and that's where you do legal business. So yeah, this is like the court, basically. Right. So basically, Lot has become like a judge, like a city councilor, right? And that's not surprising because he's very intelligent, he's relatively righteous. It's not a surprise that the people of Sodom would be like, you're a really great guy, let's give you a position of authority as a judge among us. And I suspect Lot probably thought, oh, I can be a really good influence here. This is a really evil place, but God's put me here maybe. And in my role as city councilor, maybe I can influence things for good. Right? It's not that he's lost his faith or his sense of morality, right? Because St. Peter says that Lot's righteous soul was troubled at all the sin that he saw in Sodom, right? But he doesn't leave. He sticks around, thinking, oh, it's not corrupting me. I can be a positive influence on it. And that is usually lying to yourself. See, you don't have to answer. In fact, please don't. But think about this for yourself. Are there sins, think about this, just be really honest with yourself. Are there sins that offend you less than they used to because of stuff you've seen on the internet? Are there sins that offend you less than they used to because of stuff you've seen in movies or on TV? Are there sins that used to really shock and horrify you, but you're a little bit numb to it because you hear people joking about it or chatting about it? I mean, I think it's pretty common. See, that coarsening of the conscience affects us a lot more than we want to admit, right? It's like a peer pressure, right? Peer pressure affects us more than we want to admit. And we know that Sodom had deadly peer pressure because the whole city gets involved with its sins. And even though Lot tried to be a positive influence on Sodom, it turned out that it was Sodom that influenced him. And then we can tell this, right? Because when the two angels come to Sodom, Lot shows a lot of virtue, right? And you can see how he's learned from Abram, right? He's hospitable to the angels like Abram was. He makes them food, although as Dr. McClarty points out, he makes them like unleavened bread, which is like, kind of half-hearted, but still he gives them food, right? And then when the city comes out to abuse the angels, he goes outside and tries to reason with this mob. I mean, that took some courage, right? Close the door behind yourself. Kind of foolish, you got angels there to help you. But it shows some courage. He goes out to try to tell the mob, please don't do this, don't abuse these guests, of mine. A lot to be said for Lot, no pun intended. But he also says something really, really horrible to the crowds to try to persuade them not to do this. Does anyone remember what that is? Go ahead, Livia.
I have 2 daughters. You can have them.
Yep. Yep.
How can you remember that?
I have 2 daughters who've never known a man. Take them instead. Right? Now, how could somebody as wise, like someone who'd lived with Abram, someone who knew the true God, how someone who's courageous, right? What would possess you to say that? And I'll tell you, it's because Sodom has infected him. Right? Peer pressure, obviously the people of Sodom feel like other human beings are there to, be objects of your pleasure that you can use. And that's clearly influenced, Lot, because he thinks that of his own daughters. Well, it push up to show, they can use them as a bargaining chip, right? And by the way, given that his daughters probably were like born and raised in Sodom, imagine what kind of education they would have got there. Right? I don't know if Lot was homeschooling them or what, but presumably living in that culture, right, they were soaked up in all that as well, right? And again, especially since their mother was so attached to the lifestyle of Sodom that she looks back, and it's not she's just glancing over, right? It's that she's staring and looking longingly back at it and gets turned into a pillar of salt, right? So clearly they're being raised in this themselves, right? They're soaked in this themselves, right? Now, despite all the ways that Lot has failed, because he made this fatal flaw, he thought, I'm going to go live near Sodom because it reminds me of Egypt, and I'm not going to let it corrupt me. That's the fatal flaw. God gives him a warning, no, it's not safe here. Get out of here. Don't benefit from this. Doesn't take the hint, stays there, tries to be an influence there. Didn't hear. But despite the ways that he's failed, God still lets Lot and his daughters escape. He destroys Sodom with fire. Now Lot moved here because it was as beautiful as Eden. Now it's a burning wilderness. By the way, does anyone know, where is Sodom and Gomorrah today? Anybody happen to know? The salt is a clue. Yeah, Justin.
Isn't it right on the coast of the Dead Sea?
Presumably it's actually in the Dead Sea. Like the Dead Sea is actually where Sodom and Gomorrah probably was. So, and it's famous because it has so much salt, you can just like float on it, all right? Which is interesting, right? Because salt is, God turns Lot's wife into a pillar of salt and everything. So this beautiful, go ahead, Veronica.
Do they know, actually maybe I should ask this after, this is kind of a long topic.
All right, I look forward to it later, after chapel. Anyway, so all that wealth and prestige and influence, all that land looked like Eden in Egypt, all those great riches he'd obtained, all his prestige, he's a city elder, right? He's like a local MP or something, right? All of it's reduced to ashes. Even his wife is gone. Tragedy. Starts in this amazing position. Ends up here. And it doesn't even end up here because we're not done the story yet. So Lot and his daughters flee to the mountains, which God told them to, and at first Lot, if you remember Dr. McClarty talking about this, was like, no, I can't be in the mountains, let me go to this other city. And then he ends up leaving that other city too. Because he feels scared there. And then God destroys that city too. So he ends up in these mountains with his 2 daughters. There's nowhere else to go. All 5 of the cities in the area are so evil that God has had to destroy them utterly. All that's left is this cave. You can kind of imagine why Lot has taken to alcohol. Because it's happened to Noah too. Right? After the flood, we know that Noah got drunk, lay naked in his tent. And seeing all that kind of widespread, devastating judgment, you gotta tell why it would affect somebody, especially in Lot's case, where he knows that this is his fault in some sense. And here we get to this shocking narrative, where Lot's older daughter says to the younger daughter, "There is no man on earth to become our husband." Now that's a weird phrase, but what it sounds like, according to some commentators, is she thought that God had basically done another flood, that the entire world had been destroyed by fire. So these 3 they thought they were the only ones left alive. All right? and that if they didn't have kids, the human race was going to die out. People always use these, I shouldn't say always, but sometimes people justify really unethical things on the basis of like, well, what if the world was about to end? Was it right to bomb innocent civilians in Japan? Well, if we hadn't, World War II would have kept going, and the whole world could have been destroyed. Right? I think if you're ever in that situation where like you think the whole world has ended and there's only a few people left, God is able to make human beings out of dust. You don't have to help him make new human beings. But it seems like that's what they thought. They thought that there were no other people left, so they had to take it upon themselves to generate more kids. They take matters into their own hands. They don't pray to God for help. No, it's like Abraham and Hagar, right? Let's take initiative. Let's make our own babies. So they get Lot drunk and they take turns sleeping with him and both get pregnant and have a baby.
So their solution was to have 2 boys?
Well,
it can be girls.
I mean, they didn't really have control over like the genders of
Yeah,
what was
but they're
gonna-
like, this is a good solution. We did it. Yay.
I mean, well, so this is the thing, we can wonder how warped their minds probably were. But again, where did they learn this? Their dad is the one who has modeled, hey, if you need to use your family members in an inappropriate way to get a good effect done, that's cool. If I need to use my daughters in this way to save some innocent lives, it's worth it. So they learned something. If we're going to save the human race, and that means we have to use a family member inappropriately, that's what Dad taught us. So Lot, it's this humiliating ending. This is the last we hear of Lot in the Bible. And you think, oh, what an awful thing to happen to this guy. And it is, but it's also the effect of himself. He chose to live in Sodom. He let it corrupt him. He let it corrupt his daughters. And what he modeled to them is what they're now treating him as. Right? Now he's the one who's getting abused. So, and by the way, there's also some peer pressure here, right? Because it's the older daughter. In Latin, it's actually the major said to the minor. So it's like the stronger of the 2 daughters is the one kind of pressuring the younger. And she tells her, oh, let's do this to our dad, right? And then she's like, I did it last night, now you need to do it, right? So I'm not even sure the younger daughter wanted to do this, but again, peer pressure. That's Sodom for you. It's all peer pressure. This is all the effect of Lot's choice, right? He chose to live in an evil place. He chose to raise his family in an evil place because the land was beautiful. Now it's gone. The land is gone, and the evil has corrupted his family, and now it's turned on him, all because he chose Sodom. His fatal flaw led to all of this. Right? It's a great tragedy. Great literary masterpiece. And that devastation goes beyond it, because the 2 kids are Moab and Ammon. And if you look at the map of the ancient Near East, you'll see the Dead Sea, and then there's Moab and Ammon, are like nations right around there, and all throughout the Old Testament, you see the Moabites and the Ammonites, they're constantly at war with the Israelites. So the sins that you commit, or lead other people to commit, they have effects that go on for generations. So there's a couple lessons here. You guys are young, believe it or not. Right? You can still make a lot of good choices. And Lot shows what can happen if you compromise. If you let yourself getting tricked into thinking, this won't affect me. I've got a really good foundation. I got a good education. I got a strong faith. I can get involved with this and not let it affect me. There's a reason that we pray, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Right? There's a reason we avoid the near occasions of sin. And that doesn't mean that we only live or work in a place where everyone is a Christian, or we only go to Christian websites or engage with Christian media. But compare this to Abram, which we'll talk about probably next year. But whenever Abram goes to a pagan land, he always builds an altar, digs a well, plants a tree, calls on the name of the Lord. Right? He sanctifies the place where he is. If you can't sanctify the place where you are, don't go there, whatever that means. Right? Dr. McClarney pointed out that Lot doesn't have any synagogue in Sodom. He doesn't have the 10 people necessary to create a religious community. It's a really bad idea, and that's why having an actual parish, and not just the internet, is so important. And also pay attention to when God is giving you a huge clue or signal to get out of a situation. See, Lot is saved, but everything he'd done with his life ended up going up in flames. See, 1 Corinthians 3 says that we should build our lives on the foundation of Christ, but that we should also build with good materials, because on the last day, God's judgment will test everything that we've done by fire. So if we build our lives with gold and silver, which means if we build our lives with virtue and focus on the eternal things that matter, then on Judgment Day, our lives will be vindicated, right? It will survive the flames. But St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3, if your life is built out of hay and stubble, which means if you're focusing on the things that are going to pass away, worldly success and wealth and whatever else, then on Judgment Day, everything you've done with your life is going to just dissolve instantly in the fire of God's judgment. You'll still be saved, but you won't have much to show for it. The way Paul says it is, you'll be saved, but as if by fire. All right? As if you've been plucked out of a burning building. You know, you're saved, but you don't really have anything. As opposed to building a house of gold that survives the fire, right? As your mansion in heaven forever, right? If you have faith in Jesus, and you focus on building altars and digging wells and planting trees and blessing others like Abraham, you're building up that mansion in heaven. But if you love Jesus, but you also spend your life building up just worldly success and instead of storing up treasure in heaven, you'll get to heaven, but you'll be like Lot. You're up in the mountain, you're saved by God, sure, but without much else to show for your life. And I hope that isn't what happens to you. But there's a bigger lesson to conclude this on. A tragedy has a sad ending, and a comedy has a happy ending. Can God turn this tragedy into a comedy? Well, out of this cave comes a baby named Moab. And a descendant of Moab is named Ruth. The Moabite woman who moves to Israel, marries Boaz, has a grandson named Jesse, great-grandson named David. Right? David, of course, is going to have a son, Solomon, and Solomon will marry Naamah, who is an Ammonite, a descendant of the other baby who comes out of this cave. And that means the whole kingly line of Judah has Moabite blood and Ammonite blood. And can anyone tell me, who's the most famous person you can think of who's descended from King David?
Jesus.
Jesus Christ has that blood in him. He has the blood of Moab. Right? Out of this horrifying scenario comes the royal Davidic line. And out of that becomes the Blessed Mother and Jesus Christ. In the awfulness of this cave, the ancestry of Jesus was being prepared. So maybe that's not the note we should really end on with Lot. Maybe the note we should end on is that he was an ancestor of Jesus. And this terrible sounding story is really part of Advent. All this brokenness and evil and grossness, God has a plan for it. And it'll pay off in this great eschatological happy ending of history, where, as Tolkien says, everything sad will become untrue. This awful sounding story is really a story about Jesus. So remember that when you read the news. Remember that when you see something broken that you feel you can't fix. Remember that when you're about to make a really important choice. Don't make choices that will turn your life into a tragedy. But never forget that God is the author of history, and history has a happy ending.